The Chosen One is a well-known trope amongst science fiction, fantasy, basically all of that. I mean, it's a central theme in some sense to humanity because Messiah, meaning anointed one, it's so central to um, the biggest religion in the world, that is Christianity. And Star Wars has an interesting take on the Chosen One, and that's what we're here to discuss. So, Mr. C, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me back, Connor. Appreciate it.
Um, that was a different introduction that I'm not used to just starting out like that. So tell me in the comments if you like that better than our normal introduction. But back to the topic. So the Chosen One is a Jedi prophecy. From what I can gather, is nobody knows where it came from except for that it came from the Jedi, and the Chosen One is the person who is supposed to bring balance to the Force, which in some ways is vague. Which George Lucas, I think, is well known for his vagueness. Would you say?
Yeah, I mean, Uncle George did have some ideas, and he is good at the general outline. And I think he does that as both a positive and a negative because it's so vague and generalized that, and later he can go back and quote unquote retcon some ideas or just add more, fill them out, so that way he's not tied to any specific subject matter. Like, for example, before the prequels, I mean, most fans knew that Obi-Wan and Anakin or Darth Vader fought in a volcano planet, and that's how he became Darth Vader because of the injuries he sustained. But later on, he filled it out with it was a Mustafar, and it was actually Luke's dad, and all that information. But at least he had a general outline. But
Wait, where
that's
does the
really
volcano planet come from?
it was just I didn't even. It's like you were mentioning before we even started recording. Like, we have a prophecy, but not a prophet. It's the same thing that it was just around in the, I guess, in the early internet or the zines, the magazines. It's just knowledge that Darth Vader was the Lord of the Sith, and that he got his injuries by fighting Obi-Wan in a volcano planet, wherever
Oh,
that came from. Maybe it was from interviews, probably from interviews. I'm sure there is a source somewhere that will tell you, but that was just some knowledge that was just around that we people knew about it, and then eventually that got more fleshed out further in the future.
yeah. Well, it's just you'd think, you have this Jedi prophecy. You think the prophet himself or prophetess herself would be quite an important person, for the validity of it or the invalidity of it.
I would think so because you want to refer back to the either the passage where it comes from, use the fake Journal of the Wills, verse 1, chapter 2, or whatever, or chapter 2, verse 1, or something like that, or a specific person like so and so Jedi master said this. But the vagueness and the fact that we're not told about it, even in the expanded universe, it's kind of strange. Because again, it doesn't give it that weight like you were talking about.
Yeah, because you could, the vagueness. It's interesting you talk about how you could go back and change things, and yeah, or fill things out and stuff like that. I'm starting to realize that's the big, one of Star Wars's useful aspects in some ways, at least for George, right? He could play around. It was like his sandbox that he could play around in as a director, as a writer. But he then sold it, and now I can see why it became such a mess.
Yeah, because those ideas are really with him, right? And somebody else takes them. They were so vague that they were free to discard or just change them because there was no set, besides outlines that, you hear rumors of that he had for episode 7, 8, and 9, like other ideas that he had, are not
Didn't
able to be
he?
filled in properly.
Didn't he think Darth Maul should be the villain? Like,
Yes,
wasn't
that's
Darth
what's
Maul?
been coming out in the last couple of years. That people have said that Darth Maul would have been one of the primary villains. Darth Maul and Darth Talon from the Star Wars Legacy comics that
Mm.
happened 130 years. But I guess George wanted to pluck her out and just make her, be a part of, like, a follower of Darth Maul, and obviously the midichlorian micro world that they talked about. So a lot of funky stuff. It would have been different, that's for sure. Not a rehash of first 6 episodes.
Yeah, it probably would have been kind of slightly bizarre in some ways, but also kind of interesting. Obviously, something new is better than a rehashing. It may not, it may not be as good as the old, but it still is better than rehashing the same thing.
Yeah, moving the not only storytelling forward like he like doing this technology, but it's yeah,
I
that would
mean,
have been interesting.
this whole point was, with the whole thing about like things rhyming, like, he has always talked about like there's similarities, between like and the Phantom Menace to New Hope, and all these different things. There, the blowing up of the Trade Federation ship was similar to the blowing up of the Death Star. It's sort of, but it rhymes, but in the way history rhymes, not
Right.
because history never repeats, in the exact form that it already happened. It it's just an echo of what happened previously.
Yeah, that cyclical view of history, I think it's built into Star Wars, or at least George's thinking of it, as opposed to the more linear that we're used to now in the post World War II era.
Well, I don't think cyclical is the right word for it. Um, I mean, there is some element of cycle to it, but but cycles also would mean that the same thing happens.
I guess maybe I'm even thinking of the more the Toynbee view of history. Like, you're right, it doesn't repeat, but the matter of nature's the nations declining and then rising,
Yes,
and they have
I
similar
understand what you mean.
characteristics. But
And yeah, I understand what you mean. I'm just saying, I don't think cyclical is the right word that should describe it. To me, that doesn't sound right. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's a good descriptor. Um, but yeah, so the sort of vagueness in his head, like it's kind of like I've toyed around with writing books and stuff like that. And if I just wrote it down an outline of what I wanted to see happen, and I gave it to somebody else. Um, and then they came up with ideas from that, but didn't go necessarily even follow the outline. It could be a completely different situation.
right, because they have all those chess pieces, but they move it differently. They're playing a different game that you intended them to play with.
Yeah, and they could even make alterations to the chess pieces. They're not like what I'm visually in my mind thinking about some character, and I wrote down, I don't know, let's just say I wrote down lordly man. Well, what what maybe their interpretation of lordly is corrupt or something.
Right, they probably have some more built-in, more postmodern notions of that, what that means, as opposed to maybe you have more of a regal or a, something, from the positive that has tradition and honor built in and has no cynicism with the guy. So,
Yeah, this is part of a lot of adaptations. Part of the problem with a lot of adaptations with the Rings of Power is a big example of that. I didn't, on this channel, the last time they had a season, I did a review, or I reviewed it, and I didn't do that for this season because I was kind of busy and it wasn't worth it. I didn't want to sit through it. Um, but anyways, the point is that it's a perfect example of getting things really far off the mark, and that's even with a very detailed history, very detailed concept of peoples and places and events. Maybe not as detailed as like the Lord of the Rings was, um, but detailed enough that you can get the point. And you know, the idiots who are in charge of that show completely miss the mark, of course, because they basically want to.
Yeah, they want to, and I think it's a post hoc rationalization when they talk to the fans about keeping up with the author's intent. They want to do what they want to do, but then when they do the commercial and the press junkets, they say, "Oh yeah, we're in the spirit of whichever creator, whether it's Tolkien for Rings of Power or Lucas for any Star Wars project." They just do that to
Lip service,
rationalize their project.
and then lip service.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyways, let's get to the like Anakin. He is obviously the heart of the chosen one prophecy. Um, people, I think some people argue about whether Anakin or Luke is really the um, chosen one, but I think most people, and I believe George Lucas himself, considers Anakin to be the chosen one. So let's look at his origin. I believe he was a convergence in the Force, which brought about a virgin birth. Which this is very much uh, a, a Christ-like origin, wouldn't you say?
Very much. Obviously, Lucas likes to pick up on mythological uh, themes and ideas, and it's also storytelling in Phantom Menace when Qui-Gon or Anakin's mother tells Qui-Gon about his birth that this is just a shorthand of saying that this guy's special. That's why his midichlorian count is so high. That's why midichlorians come in, because that's just a shorthand way of saying, his power level is higher than anybody else's, right? Okay, this guy special birth, and this guy has special midichlorian count, so he has high concentration of that. So that's just a shorthand to get the audience knowing that this guy's special.
Do you think midichlorian count is also kind of like the living force? I believe, is it basically the living force within you?
I will have to think more about it. To me, that concept never bothered me. That was just their way of
Well, it doesn't bother
scientifically trying to
me.
measure. But
It doesn't bother me. I'm just saying that it actually makes a lot of sense if it's sort of the force is literally strong with this person because they have a high midichlorian count.
yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think other lore has fleshed that out where it's you may have a higher or lower midichlorian count, but it's also up to you to actually utilize that. As it's like having all the tools, but if you don't know how to use them, they'll go waste. So um
Yeah, that's kind of the midichlorian and the force potential has been kind of a running debate amongst, I think, Star Wars fans these days, especially with the Ahsoka show, in which Sabine Wren, who had no potential whatsoever, pretty much started to have force powers because of training.
right, because I remember watching Rebels. I did watch all of Rebels, and I did not think they even hinted at her being a force powered at all. But I could be wrong. Maybe
No,
they have
I would
one or two scenes, but yeah, I was not part of their cause for her
no.
character.
It was more of a joke because you'd think Kanan would have picked up on it. He trained her with the dark saber, and he saw absolutely no potential.
No, no, she's just a good Mandalorian warrior, or tries to be one, at least in her own way. Nothing having to do with Force and the Jedi. No.
And the only thing that changed between those two stories was trauma, which she already had, which to me, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense. The only thing that changed was that that her family all were killed, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so, but even like you said in the original show, she had trauma because she helped build some kind of mass mass weapon that they used.
You mean that's what I said. Yeah, you
Yeah,
mean in the Rebels, not the original trilogy.
yeah, correct. They had some
Uh,
kind of like Star
she be-
Devastator, some kind of super weapon that they used. It was in later seasons too.
she built a Mandalorian armor destroyer, basically, when, uh, under the Imperials,
Right.
and it's weird because she sort of fled from that, but she was considered a traitor for fleeing, for getting away from the Empire, which is weird. Not not a traitor for building the weapon, which to me doesn't make a lot of sense. But if I'm not mistaken, people didn't know about the weapon, maybe, so that might be the reason. But either way, I don't see why fleeing from the Empire would make you a traitor amongst Mandalorians. I mean, I get that all of them were under Imperial occupation, but you know, I mean, there was probably only a small amount that really believed in the Empire. So
Yeah, maybe they're trying to think of something like Mandalorian has a high honor culture, so even betraying even a corrupt government still looked down upon. I don't know.
it just seems a little forced because that honor would be a Mandalore, right? Like not your honor isn't linked to a exterior group.
Yeah, foreign occupying force. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't think that's how that would work. I think that's kind of a forced a forced conflict. I kind of think Dave Filoni didn't have a good enough reason to have her be with the group.
No.
And the more I think about it, I was like, when I watched it originally, I think I didn't really care. You know, she wasn't the main character, anyways. Um, so I don't know.
Yeah, and with Dave, I mean, he really was. He needed George to help him out with the ideas. They had George and Dave. I think they had a good collaboration, but I think Dave by himself, whatever happened with him politically or whatever, really suffered, and Star Wars has suffered as a result. But that's another conversation.
Well, I do think people we talk about whether George was that active on the Clone Wars. A lot of people don't think he was actually, that they just kind of said he was, but that he actually wasn't. And I'm curious about what the actual truth about that is, like whether Dave Filoni, because a lot of it was Dave Filoni saying that George helped, like said to him about something. Was Dave Filoni kind of making things up there? I don't know, or
He
at
could
least
have, but I
or
mean,
at least
George had his
stretching the
daughter.
truth.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, at least stretching the truth.
It could have been, but I mean, George has his daughter there, and behind the scenes, even though it is behind the scenes from Lucasfilm, at that point it wasn't owned by Disney. They did show George on those pitch meetings and generally supervising. So out of all the Star Wars post episode content or movie content, it seems like this he was actually involved. How heavy his hand was, I think it really depended on who you
Yeah.
believe. But I think he was pretty. I think he still cared about the Star Wars and it was really his idea to continue the Clone Wars. So I think he was more involved than not.
Yeah. So we have the question is, what brought about the convergence in the Force? The acolyte, which is pure garbage, uh, is kind of um getting making the implication, and this has been implied in other things, but not fully confirmed in anything George Lucas actually wrote, that the Emperor basically created the convergence and basically is the father in some sense of Anakin Skywalker. And I almost think that's why Rey is where they got the idea for Rey as being a Palpatine, is that in some sense, from their perspective or from certain people's perspective, Anakin's kind of a Palpatine too.
I can see that, and I can see a way that maybe it could have worked if they figured that out. Taking that a through line, but yeah, it's kind of muddy though at this point, and that's kind of like a reach. But I think you could make it work, but they just didn't.
Well, I think it's I think the whole concept of Anakin a being a creation by the Emperor by Palpatine is a perversion of the chosen one myth. The concept. The whole. I mean, first of all, evil creating anything, wholly good is my perspective impossible. And then basically, like the whole point is that basically from that argument, in some sense, Anakin is a creation of evil. He is evil at the beginning, which doesn't really make sense with the character in the Phantom Menace.
No, he's definitely portrayed as a pure spirit, somebody who wants to help people, and that kind of defeats his character arc, or have a inbuilt flaw as opposed to one coming narratively.
And like, if that's the case, how are you telling me that Palpatine didn't know where he was? Like, why didn't he just pick him up?
Right, or have somebody watch over him or something.
Yeah, like why was he on Tatooine with absolutely, like, just kind of, I mean, he just kind of accidentally gets into the story.
It doesn't make sense that specific. And it doesn't come, like you said, from the main canon. It was kind of hinted at in Darth Plagueis book, but that was by James Luceno, the author, and then further elaborate, like you said, in the Acolyte and the second version of Marvel Comics Darth Vader
And of
issue.
course, I don't give when I bring up like Disney Star Wars stuff, I'm not really like giving it like credence on the actual, lore or anything like that, or any of the I'm just touching on it because it's a it's the contemporary concept that is coming out of Lucasfilm that is really quite bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, and traditionally, the chosen one is somebody like a great man of history type of figure, somebody who's gonna there, the Messiah, like you mentioned earlier, the Christos, the one who's going to singularly make a change for the good, and that's what the prophecy was at least implied to be. So, in order in it being corrupted by the new era, it's really disappointing because one likes to see a story that has different dramatic elements, and having this chosen one who falls but yet at the end of the day is still redeemed and fulfills his mission, right, his purpose in life. It's a great narrative that's universal, and seeing that diminished by contradicting it in different areas, it's really disappointing.
Well, one of the things that the people making Star Wars these days identify most with is the villains. While I think George Lucas identified with Luke Skywalker.
He did that, his hero for the thousand faces, the one who actually literally was an archetype for the hero's journey.
Yeah, I just don't think that. I think most Hollywood people these days identify with the villains, and that's why they give them so much credence, and that's why main characters are often seen doing evil things and then being justified in it.
Yeah, we're wanting to root for them in a sense. Make how is this evil or bad guy supposed to succeed? I mean, it could be interesting narratively, but when that's all you're given, right? You don't have a diet of a balanced view of actually a hero being a hero for his own sake, for wanting to do the good, the true, or the beautiful. It has a distorted view on reality and our morals and lessons that somebody might get, especially as Star Wars is designed for everyone, but specifically for male children. It's important for them to have that growing up and having. There's a point or a place for gray area in storytelling, but sometimes you really want those contrasts between good and evil to really highlight.
And yeah, and uh, um, Star Wars is a story about good and evil. Like, it's supposed to be contrasted. It's supposed to have a fine line. That's kind of the origin of it. A lot of the things that George Lucas like was uh, interpreted or not interpreted, was inspired by in making it were things where the villains and the heroes were clearly distinguished.
Yeah,
Now,
and those could be ideas for great stories. They don't have to be lame or two-dimensional. You can still have depth with them. It's really no matter how you execute them.
yeah, I saw like a thumbnail saying like virtue is not boring. Um, like that's kind of the belief amongst people these days is that virtue is boring. So why would you even tell the story of a hero, basically? Um, and I kind of understand in some sense why some people think that virtue is boring because the virtue or what they think is virtue on TV or on movies is basically summed up by superheroes, and they have become sort of the pinnacle of bland. Like, everything they do is showy, but like as personalities, as like what they stand for or what they believe in, is just like slogans. It's
Yeah, they
nothing
don't really live it
concrete.
out. Yeah.
Well, it's not concrete. There's nothing they actually like. They're not forced to actually stand up for anything specific. It's all vague.
And that's
And
for a
you
lot of reasons, right? Not to one of them is probably not to offend. They have to be vague and generalized enough that other consumers can see themselves in it. They can't be too specific. So that's
well, yeah, virtue requires morals. And
yeah.
if you don't have morals and you're not going to be virtuous, and there is no and morals will always offend somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems at best they have a libertarian view, or the best they can do is like as long as you're not hurting anyone, you can be good. There's nothing more concrete than that. At least in a lot of heroes that I
Which is
see.
kind of ironic with superheroes because they're supposed to fight people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you guys are the ones literally punching people. I mean, some usually for good reasons, or at least previously for good reasons. But
Right.
but your job is the physical punching. So, anyways, hurting people in that case is just part of the job. For a good reason, obviously. Now we talk about sort of the prophecy. We don't know anything about it really. We have no we don't know the words of the prophecy, which is kind of bizarre. I mean, we know uh that there'll be was it that this prophetic person will bring balance to the force, right? That's kind of all we know. Or do we know some sort of written down thing? Do we?
No, not even at least to my knowledge, even in the expanded universe, they don't have as this is the book where that comes from, or further elaboration. I mean, it's pretty much Sam Jackson's or Mace Windu's words from episode one. When Qui-Gon talks about Anakin, he says you refer to the prophecy of the one who brings to the Force. Basically what he mentions, and then later on Yoda. That's basically what we know about the prophecy.
Well, doesn't Yoda questions maybe the prophecy was misread? Like, what? It's interesting. What could have been misread about it? Like, of course, we don't know because he never gives us any, uh, any he doesn't give us anything to be read,
Right.
to
It's like
to be
it's
misread.
misread, but what was originally read, so we can understand his
Yeah.
content.
So where is the possibility for confusion? Like, is the prophecy vague? Like even vaguer than just what we know? And really interesting enough, they don't ever like. I don't think the Jedi Council ever determines whether or not Anakin's the chosen one or anything like that.
Mm.
It's just kind of brought up sort of at the end by Obi-Wan, where he says it was said that you said that you're destroyed. They said not join them, bring balance to the force, and not leave it in darkness. Like that sort of thing.
Yeah, you almost want to go in and take all those quotes like this is what the balance of the force. people have said the balance of the force isn't trying to come up with a working theory by working backwards and piecing it together. Um, because people talk about, well, the balance, does that mean that equal parts good and equal parts evil? What is the actual balancing of the force is? So it's kind of interesting that
Yeah, I think he does. I think what he means is balancing like your emotions. If that makes sense. I
that's
think
always
what
in my interpretation too. It's more like a regulating force. It's not equal parts good and evil. It's more like a regulating force that um, helps the world or the universe continue in a proper order.
maybe. Yeah, the whole balance of the force thing is just an odd thing, but I think this is drawing from Eastern religions.
Yeah, most definitely. Like they have the Christian, the Hebrew notion of the Messiah, right? Other from other religions as well, but that's more of that aspect, and then the Eastern part comes in with the valence aspect of it.
Yeah, I've always heard people say that or I've heard people say that s- uh, the original trilogy was very sort of Western religious in nature, and the prequel trilogy is kind of Eastern tendencies more so.
I could see that, especially since the original trilogy really it was more black and white and less quote unquote nuance than the prequels. Um,
I
but
mean, Obi-Wan does say, that that Luke's uncle thought he might go off with Obi-Wan on one of those damned crusades.
yes, yes, a crusade.
That I mean, I think we've talked about this before, but that always sticks out in my head as the most bizarre thing maybe in the whole context of Star Wars.
Right, you're thinking of something righteous, like a holy war, but Balerian jihad, like a Dune sort of thing. Yeah,
Well, sure, but but a but I mean, crusade is a holy war, but like the Jedi never go on a holy war. We've never seen that.
no, they were forced. Yeah, well, as it got filled out, they were basically forced to be the not the guardians of peace and justice, but
Mhm.
uh, generals in
Generals.
the war that they didn't ask for. At least most of them did not.
But it's just kind of interesting because the other context, if I'm not mistaken, that even the extended universe used the word crusade with Mandalorians, not Jedi.
Hmm.
And crusades in that context is the sort of the modern interpretation of what that means, which is bad,
Mm.
basically. Of course, that's not what it means, but that's the perception. You can tell a lot of sort of the perception of what um, of what they think of certain words by how they use it. Crusade for Mandalorian is basically like you know trying to take over the galaxy and plundering and gaining fame and stuff like that.
Yeah, I can see that, especially in a post 9/11 world, how that could context come about.
Yeah. So I guess, anyways, in price. Yeah. Anyways, it's interesting. I've never read Dune. I have to read it at some point. And I've been avoiding the movies until I read it. So I didn't know that they used the word jihad.
Yeah, that's the war that they have against the machines before the book even starts. It's almost like a backhanded back. It was a backstory to the actual story of why they don't have intelligent AI in their future, and they need
Oh,
mentats to fly their spaceships and not machines.
okay, interesting.
It's like a
Um,
Terminator sort of thing about machines took over, so they had to fight. Humanity had to fight back against the machine.
as I said, I don't know anything about it. Now, one of the things interesting. is that Anakin is considered too old by the council to train, basically. Um, at the time. But and do you think the fact that they relented is just a signal that they did think Anakin was going to be the chosen one, or that it was possible? Like,
Maybe I see it from my stance that it was basically they wanted to punt on the issue, so they wanted to find any way to not deal with it. So it's like, if he's 8 or 10 years old, where however old he is, he's too old. So we not just go with that. We don't want to.
yeah,
Uh,
but then they changed their minds. Like it seems like Yoda's the one that we only get that through Yoda, just when he tells Obi-Wan that he can train him.
Yoda seems to be the first among equals, right? The one who actually, even though they are knights of or
Like,
like a Arthurian legend, like a Knights of the Round Table, he seems like he has more sway than the other members. So
well, he is the Grand Master.
he is okay.
And yeah, he is probably the Arthurian figure in that.
And due
But
to
like, but what's the change? That's what I'm trying to figure out. What's the change?
I think ironically, it's the death of Qui Gon and the emotions attached to that. He's like, well, this is what he wanted. It's like a last wish sort of thing. Let's fulfill what Qui Gon wanted. It
So
was
it's
like,
just kind of weak indecision, weak like
that's my reading of it at least. Like, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's such a weird thing for a bunch of supposedly very cold-hearted people, which is what kind of the council's portrayed as most of the time.
Yeah, that stoic nature, and it's like, yeah, well, we'll give you this one. But
Like that's considered one of the weaknesses, the stoic nature of the council, generally speaking.
it is, but I think that they had a reason to be. It's really about mediation, right? Like that Aristotelian notion that balance, even that's we can be stoic, but we also have to have some leeway to let emotion in as well. I think you can't go one side to the next to not be too emotional, but also not to be too rigid. It's that combination, which I think that's what Lucas was trying to say with Luke as a good third option in Return of Jedi.
Yeah. Okay. It just seems like it's kind of an unanswered thing, kind of like left up to the viewer. I just kind of think that George Lucas didn't maybe have an answer for why he just needed it to happen.
Yeah, it just happened, and yeah, like you said, it's just viewer interpretation. Let's move on. Like it happened. Anakin's gonna be trained. Let's move on.
Yeah, exactly. Like we had a conflict earlier. Stuff happened. You know. Now let's move on. Now, Luke is it's obviously Anakin fell to the dark side um because basically uh Anakin would not let go of his basically probably his what is it, jealousy, basically just jealousy, pride, that sort of thing, covetousness. He could not handle loss,
No.
like one more loss. He lost his mother, he lost Qui-Gon, which is basically losing his mother and father, and now he thought he was going to lose his wife. And by thinking he was going to lose his wife and acting the way he did, he lost his wife.
Yeah.
That's just how it goes, apparently.
I mean, he lost a sister, and with the addition of the Clone Wars with Ahsoka, right? And then he lost
Yeah,
his child, which he didn't know they were twins, but he lost his child as well. So a lot of loss.
that's true. Yeah. Though I don't really think Ahsoka had much to do with the fall.
Well, not originally, no, obviously, because he wasn't invented yet. But I mean, if we
No,
take
no,
that,
I just don't think, even in the grand scheme of things, I think, I I don't think he had that. I think it was kind of like losing a colleague at work, like a close friend.
Okay.
I just don't think that would push you over the edge.
No, no, but it added. I would, even in my head, kind of just added to his,
Maybe, but like,
frustrations.
I don't like, they want you to. This is kind of a thing about like even like later, um, uh, what like more modern stuff makes uh Pete makes like sort of the idea of creating a family for yourself out of people that aren't related to you. You know, that's kind of a tendency these days.
Yeah, Friendsgiving.
Yeah, basically. And it has its place. It's not like it's an entirely foreign concept, um but I just don't think it would have as big of an impact. And based on everything George put forward, I think it was I think Ahsoka was a failed like he may feel like he failed as with his responsibility, but I just don't think she added a cause, if anything, you know, because at least you could argue that he might feel like he let himself down or he let her down, right?
Yeah.
While in all these other contexts, just tragedy strikes him.
Right, and I like how you mentioned that Qui-Gon as a father figure, because I usually think of his mother and his wife, but Qui-Gon was also, even though they briefly met, he loomed large in his who Anakin was.
You could say he's a father figure that never was. Kind of like, he was the definition of what he wanted for a father.
And since they only met for such a short time, he probably idealized a lot onto Qui-Gon too.
Well,
So
yes, he put a lot on. I would assume he put a lot on his memory, because he changed his life dramatically. Obi-Wan didn't do that.
no,
Obi-Wan was adjacent to it, and I guess he took the one step and fulfilled uh, uh Qui-Gon's dying wish and trained him, but that wasn't Obi-Wan's desire. That was actually Qui-Gon's.
right, and I wonder that Albert played a role into he Obi-Wan checked the box as trying to be your mentor, but Anakin in the back of his head always knew that he didn't want this originally. This is out of duty more than out of duty and love, right?
Well,
Maybe
yeah,
eventually did grow to love him, but it was originally he didn't want to do it. It was out of duty, forced
yeah,
upon him.
Obi-Wan's kind of like an older brother.
Yeah,
And when your parents die, if you're, God forbid, you're in that situation, the eldest has a responsibility to take care of the younger. Eldest boy usually has a responsibility to take care of younger siblings or even his sisters, if he has any. And I think Obi-Wan fulfilled that or filled that part, but it's just not the same. It's never going to
yeah,
be the same. And that's kind of the point. And you know, adoptive parents is different than like adoptive siblings. You know what I mean? Like they can never be the full thing. The true thing, in my opinion. But it's easier to believe in adopted parents.
no, yeah.
Uh,
There is definitely a marked difference between them.
yes. Anyway, so we have Luke. He basically, is you know cut off from his father. His mother's dead. He's living with his aunt and uncle, and he's kind of the quintessential farmer boy to space wizard. And out of love for his father, and uh, just sort of he brings his father back to redemption, and by that they both sort of are fulfilling the prophecy. Balance to the force more or less means the destruction of evil. It seems, at least based on the results of in the Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, that's my reading. They destroyed the Sith, and if destroying the Sith, which represents evil, it's a balancing of the Force. And that means that it can't be this Eastern notion of equal parts good and evil. Somehow, good is has to be the regulator or the winner of this equation, and that's how balance is struck by getting rid of that parasitical evil nature that the Sith represent.
I think balance is getting rid of the selfish. It's making yourself selfless, probably.
Yeah,
Um,
giving yourself, laying yourself down for your friends. Yeah.
Now let's talk briefly about the butchering of the concept of the chosen one um, by the sequel trilogy and by sort of Disney's post Return of the Jedi situation. Now, we discussed that George Lucas had something in mind, but we really don't know what it would have been at the end.
No, no.
But what we did get was, well, first of all, what I would imagine after a chosen one succeeds, I would imagine that there would be some sort of restoration. And I think like it's a perfect example of this is if we if you look at Lord of the Rings and you see Aragorn's rest, um the Return of the King, he becomes the king of Gondor and Arnor, and he basically restores as much. He's basically the restorer of all things that he can. That's within his power. But it would be like if evil grew like to an extreme degree under his watch, like that he failed so spectacularly that the restoration was only surfacey. Maybe politically things have changed a little bit, but nothing under the surface. Nothing. There's no depth to the change. Which Star Wars has a strong spiritual, strong, um, you know, below the surface element to it. So it's strange to me that everything just kind of collapses and the nothing is really changed. Everything is almost exactly um easily destroyable. That's kind of the thing. The sequel trilogy comes in and basically destroys anything that that Luke may have started to create. What do you think about that?
I mean, it was always going to be a delicate balance because you have a episode 6 ends in a happy ending, so you're breaking up the happy ending in order to tell your story, in order to even at the end of your own story to wrap it up again. So what what justifies the breaking up of the happy ending to achieve your own new story? And you have to do it in such a way that you're not diminishing what came before. I mean, when the Sith were defeated by Darth Vader or Anakin, I would think that the Sith line would be dead and over. So maybe a new evils might come up, but it would be come up in a new form. That way, it doesn't invalidate what the sacrifice of Anakin and also through Luke, uh, you know, accomplished. So,
Yeah, the
it,
Emperor returning is the biggest sort of ridiculousness in that. But what's crazy is, if I'm not mistaken, the extended universe did that.
yes, he did. He did come back. In
He was a
Dark Empire
clone.
1 and 2. Yeah.
It was a clone, wasn't it?
Well, his essence, and then he had to inhabit a body, but he came back and yeah, that's in a clone. But it was actually him. It wasn't like a clone of him. It was him in inhabiting a clone body. Um,
Right.
yeah.
So, was this almost inevitable with Star Wars?
No, not with George. I don't think he wanted to do. He liked things to rhyme, but he like you mentioned in the beginning of the podcast. I don't think he wanted to also repeat himself either. I think he would have done something else, even though he would have brought back Darth Maul. I think it would have been a different sort of um,
Well, he
notion.
already brought back Darth Maul.
Well, yeah, I guess to the mass audiences too.
Sure.
and he probably would have been more of a gangster figure, like he was apparently being groomed to be, more than a Sith Lord. So it would have been a different kind of corruption and evil, and um, maybe it could have been his own, I don't know, Thrawn sort of deal where he was very analytical, maybe. But anyways, I think it would have been different enough that, if you're breaking your good ending, you would have built it back up by either at worst how it previously was, or at best something even better, storytelling wise. So I think he could have got there, would help with the help of other people, because it seems like, but behind the scenes, the sequel trilogy would have been, through George Lucas, it would have been more like the original trilogy, in that he would have gave a lot of the responsibilities to other people, so there would have been more collaboration. And I think that helped out in storytelling when it came to episodes 4, 5, and 6, with a collaboration aspect, because George is great with ideas, but sometimes he needs people to feed, and push back a little bit, and out of that comes out something greater. So I think it could have worked, maybe not as good as the original trilogy, but I think it would have been something that would have been better, or on par with the prequel trilogy. And here we are still talking about the prequel trilogy years later, because there's still good nuggets in them. So
Oh yeah, I mean, we're also talking about how bad the sequel trilogy is too.
yeah.
But that's more just a societal sort of uh, uh black dot, black mark on how ridiculous our society has become, and how greedy uh terrible creators are. I have no respect for anything except
No, they're
for,
very mercenary. Like, they just have a job and they say lip service, and then they go on to the next thing.
yeah. Though, but that's one of the things is I think a lot of people are like that with every kind of job they do.
So we need mythology and virtue in stories, something to live up to and try
Oh
to
yeah,
avoid those temptations.
but as I said, people don't know what virtue is because virtue requires morals, and people don't really people have morals insofar as they think they shouldn't do certain things, right? But
Yeah.
they have no actual reason why they do that. They just kind of do it or don't do it. Sometimes it's about whether they feel good about it, sometimes it's not. But how many people are really thinking about like what makes something good or what makes something bad? And as you said, it really sometimes just comes down to, am I hurting anyone?
Yeah.
Well, what if you're hurting yourself?
Yeah, that's true. I never think about that aspect, and how
Well,
everything really affects, even if you don't think so. You're hurting your own self still affects others.
you also never hear anybody, or you rarely hear, I should say, people use the word soul. Where the effects of the soul. Um, people think about their feelings and all that, and that's the only thing they kind of consult. But uh, their soul is, let's just say, they completely disconnected from the conversation in this.
Yeah, it really they insole the feelings in a sense. Yeah.
So, what do you think about the chosen one from the Star Wars perspective? What's your takeaway?
Well, growing up with the original trilogy and then the prequel trilogy, chosen one concept is really an episode one and a prequel concept, but I don't think it's actually a retcon. I think it actually adds to the story that was already there. So I think it was a good background introduction, and it really ties episodes 1 through 6 together. And that really got solidified for me today when I watched. Literally, it's called The Chosen One, from the episode 3 DVD, when they did a behind the scenes sort of thing about what George Lucas thinks, or at least he did in 2005 when the prequel DVD was coming out. And it really just solidifies that it is Anakin's story. Even though it gets passed down to Luke, it eventually circles back to Anakin's story, his rise, his fall, but his eventual redemption, and like how nobody is. It's never too late to redeem yourself, even whatever you have done. And the chosen one, even as somebody we might put up on a pedestal, can fall, but we can say that as an example of always of the good triumph over evil, and that's I think what Star Wars is really about. You know, fathers and sons relationships, but also about good triumphing over evil, even against the odds. You do the right thing.
Well, Mr. C, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope everyone else did. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And God bless everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.